My name's Jonty.
I'm Laura.
I'm Malky.
And with the...
Sorry, I missed that. Was I supposed to say I'm Steve?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay,
That's good.
sorry.
That's good. We'll do it one more time. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't even get the introduction right. That's how good this is going to be.
This is going to be great, I'm sure.
Yeah, here we go.
Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's Jonty.
I'm Laura.
I'm Malky.
And I'm Steve.
You're joined by Steve Chalke. Hey, thank you so much, Steve, for being on the show. We really appreciate it. For people who are not familiar with your work, which seems hard to believe in the British Christian scene, could you give us a little introduction as to who you are?
Well, I'm a Baptist minister. And in 1985, I left the church I was working for. I was working as a youth worker to set up what has become the Oasis Trust. I wanted, as a teenager, when I first became involved in the church, became a Christian, however you want to put it, I decided that when I grew up, I wanted to be a church leader, set up a house for kids that had nowhere to go and no one loved them, set up a school that was worth going to, and set up a hospital. And that lived with me from the day I walked home from a youth club at the age of 14, knowing that I wanted to give my life to serving Christ. I went to theological college. I worked as a youth worker. I was ordained, worked as a youth worker in a church, and then decided to leave that job with the blessing, the help of the church, to set up what has become known as Oasis. And Oasis now, it was me in a room. It's now about 6,000 staff in England and working in various other countries around the world. We run schools, we run healthcare, we run housing, we run developed churches and all sorts of other things. It's all about it's all about building healthy communities where everyone can understand that they're loved by God and achieve their potential.
Nice. That is a good intro. And you were also speaking at Greenbelt this year. We're all kind of just coming off the Greenbelt high. Actually, there were a lot of psychedelic orientated things around there. So some people are coming off an actual high, I would imagine. But what did you think of Greenbelt this year? Are you a regular? Are you a Greenbeltee? You must have been there many times over the years, I'm sure. Yeah,
I'm a semi-regular. There's all sorts of other things go on, aren't there, over bank holiday weekends in August, and but I'm there every 3 or 4 years, and I love it every time I go. I loved it this time. It was absolutely fantastic to be in an environment that's so diverse.
Yeah.
You cannot go to Greenbelt without bumping into worldviews that are not your own, without bumping into people who don't challenge some of your assumptions about life. It's a brilliant learning curve. It's better than reading a book. It's a kind of multi-dimensional immersion into learning. It's absolutely fantastic. You come away with more ideas every time you're there than you can possibly count or even list. Wonderful.
Lovely. Laura, what did you think of Greenbelt this year? What were your highlights?
Oh, I loved it. I feel like we get this every time we go as well. It's just like you come back and you just feel so buoyed, like, and just so loved. And it's just like, oh, I love it. Like every year, like you look forward to it so much, and then it's just like, oh, this is so great. Yeah, I think highlights included Bob Villan. Really liked Bob Villan.
Oh, Bob
They were
Villan was
amazing, so fun. And really liked Siskin Green. Siskin Green, fantastic. I think Jonty's just interviewed them for Church Times, and they were just delightful. And I just love them so much. Seeing Richard Braw, also good. I'm going to steal everyone's highlights because I know these are like...
Yeah, what are you doing, man?
Highlights. I'm going to let someone else have a highlight because it was so fun. Yeah,
let me jump back in and say, for me, one of the extraordinarily glorious moments was Flamey Grant.
Oh, so good.
So good.
Yeah, singing El Shaddai, Amy Grant's song from the stage at the communion. It was so moving. It was wonderful. What wonderful lyrics, and who better to sing those lyrics?
And what a voice as well.
Hell of a voice.
Hell of a voice. Yeah, so good.
Malks, what did you think? What was your highlights?
Yeah, Steve stole my thunder because I was going to reference Flamey as well. and we were lucky enough to speak to her. I don't know what order our podcasts are going to come out, but we managed to get Flamey on the pod. So look forward to that, listeners, or reflect on what you've just heard, depending on the order. But just love the sort of the journey that she's been on, and sort of tackling the misogyny of the church and the homophobia in the church through song. Like, just found a lot of that kind of a very liberating space, and it was great to speak to her. And I love the sort of in between bits. I think, as Steve touched on, like, just mulling around and chatting to people. Like, one guy, I was speaking to a guy in the pub at one point who'd just been on a panel. We shared an accent, so we started chatting. He was from Glasgow, and he was part of a group who formed the first union in an Apple store in the UK.
Incredible.
Which was amazing. And talking about like the fight, the powers that be at Apple did not look kindly on that. So that was a struggle, and just how that battle. So those are the sort of there's random folks you bump into. And what about you, Jonty?
I loved Bob Vylan. Bob Vylan was my highlight. I just thought it was incredible to hear. So I thought it was like really great and brave of Greenbelt to put Bob Vylan on. It's a very aggressive act. I found it hilarious how he kept on, saying the most appalling language. I say appalling language. You swear like this all the time on the show. So, but just not something that you hear on stage for a Christian concert, and but just in a very cool way. Just like what you would expect from kind of punk rap stuff. And I thought it was brave as well to go, we're not a pacifist band. We believe in violent resistance and violent struggle, particularly talking in the context of some of the struggles for liberation going on around the world, because I'm conflicted about that as a Christian, but I think we tend to default to pacifism, which is just another word we use for complacency. And even as a 95% pacifist, I just thought that was refreshing to hear a kind of honest approach to that. And also I look forward to all the middle-class white people complaining about how a black man's struggle is expressed. I think that'll be really interesting to see. So
anyone who remembers our conversation with Paul Northup, creative director, Dutty Moonshine, not the people he's going to get letters about. Bob Vylan are the people he's going to get letters about.
Paul
so send up a prayer for Paul. Dealing with those letters.
He's going to get letters. And if you enjoyed Greenbelt, send a letter to them saying what you liked about it, particularly if you did like the stuff you think people are going to send letters about. But I love that. Loved the music. Really loved Siskin Green as well. Really loved Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is, so basically just, copying Laura and Malky. That's the main thing. So, I think we should do what we're drinking right now. I think that makes sense. I think that would be good. So, Steve, what are you drinking?
Well, do you know something? Look at that. You've just shown us what you're drinking. I was going to bring in with me red wine, and I got a little bottle of red wine, and then I had to nip out because there was a phone call that I had to take about the project we're launching, and I've come into this room without my red wine.
That is heartbreaking, and we'd happily wait for you if you wanted, but also if you're not that first, we're fine.
No, as you're talking, I'll nip out and get it, but
excellent.
Not right now.
All right, fantastic. Well, Laura, what you drinking?
I'm classically on a can of cider once again. Got a taste for the old cider again at Greenbelt. I only had 1 pint of crazy goat, so back on normal Thatchers now.
Malks, what you drinking?
I am drinking Estrella Dam. I've just noticed it's got a jazzy label. Damn. Yeah. So there you go.
Speaking of strong language, is it the alcohol free or no?
No, it's just a regular one.
Hey, oi.
And it's got a big cool gold star on it too.
Love it. That's great. And I'm drinking. It's called Angioletti Reserva. which is a cider that comes in a bottle that I think is really pretty, which is why I bought it for the first time. And it's also really sweet and lovely. And I have a backup Thatcher's, just copying Laura some more. So
We are matching Thatchers.
our path to becoming the same person is
Are those the Thatchers you bought for me at Greenbelt that I didn't drink?
yeah, they are actually.
It would be valid.
Anyway.
Valid.
So that's the drinks. So I think what I would like to start with, Steve, is to talk about my earliest memory of you was...
Before you do that, I am actually just going to jump in and say what I would like to start with, Steve, is what are your thoughts on Liam and Noel getting back together? Because I know this has been a really big week for you guys at Oasis. So...
Congratulations on the band getting back together, Oasis.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing, wasn't it? I sent a tweet yesterday morning. I said, Oasis, the charity, was formed in 1985. Oasis, the band, formed in 1991. Oasis, the band, split up in 2009. Yeah. And then I said, Oasis, the band, has just announced their reunion tour in 2025. And then lastly, I said, Oasis, the charity, is really excited that this great event happens, but wants to tell everyone that we've been serving for the last 40 years. 25 is our 40th anniversary. We've been serving in an uninterrupted, continuous way for 40 years.
There you
so
go.
Glad they're back.
It's probably best because you're not led by two fighty brothers. I think that's probably what it comes down to.
I will also say it's been a really hard few days to do any research on Oasis the timesheet because nothing is coming up for you guys.
Their logos have been slightly similar to ours.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing.
I think now that they're reunited, you need to get them to do some kind of benefit concert for you. I think it's only right.
It's a great rejoicing. Great songs. I wonder if they're going to have any new ones. What do you think?
Yeah, I hope so. But I don't know. That's kind of depressing if they're trashing the legacy. That's often when bands that broke up for a reason get back together. I'm always a little bit like, please don't ruin everything.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Well, what I wanted to say was that my first memory of finding out about you was when I was quite new in the UK, and there was quite a lot of I think it's fair to say Baptist churches losing their minds over some stuff that you had said about penal substitution and how that image of atonement is not and what happened at the cross is not something that you think is you don't find any joy in that. You called it, I think, cosmic child abuse, or that concept is cosmic child abuse. People lost their minds. Since then, you've come out on some kind of hot button issues for conservative evangelical churches, like same-sex marriage, in support of that sort of stuff, all stuff that we find quite reasonable. And again, a lot of controversy. The church then, when it seemed to just absolutely explode, if you even questioned one thing, has it changed much since then? Has it grown up at all? Do you sense something different in the church? And have you changed in terms of how you would approach those things today?
Well, I think the first thing I should say is about me. I hope I'm changed by last weekend at Greenbelt. I hope I'm changed by this conversation. I hope I'm changed by the next book that I read, the next podcast that I listen to. But life is something that you either mature through or you get stuck, don't you? So often people will say to me, Steve, you don't believe what you believed 5 years ago. And I respond, and I hope in 5 years' time, I don't believe what I believe now. If you're alive, you're growing. And if you're learning, you're changing. So turning it on its head, I say to people, and do you hope to learn anything over the next half decade? Oh, yeah, of course. Well, that's going to change you. So I think we're all on a journey, aren't we? And we're all learning all of the time. And we're all changed, not just by the books we read or the films we watch or the experiences we have, but by the people that we meet. And I think theology should be worked out in that way. I think if you read the New Testament or the books of the New Testament a little bit more deeply than at a surface level, you realize that, for instance, what Paul is saying in his epistles, in his letters, is he's saying different things to different Christians in different places because he's contextualizing his message for them. These are people he knows and situations he knows and cities he knows. And so he's writing for them. Perhaps one of the big mistakes we make, actually, with Paul's letters is we think they're universal truth to everyone all of the time, instead of truth to the church in Corinth at that moment, etc., etc. So we're all learning. In terms of, is the church growing up? I think that we grow up as individuals slowly. Some people get stuck, but we grow up as individuals slowly. But I think there are whole wings of the church which promote a kind of, we know what's best. You must believe this. If you don't believe this, if you think differently, there's no room for you. And actually, just earlier this afternoon, I had I had a gin and tonic, actually, not a glass of wine. I had a gin and tonic with somebody, a couple that came to see me, and they were telling me about their church, which they said, is a straitjacket. They're in it, they don't know what to do. They're in the church. There's a lot that the vicar, it's a vicar in that case, says that they don't want to fall out with anyone. They just want to be able to say, but that's not quite the way I see it. But they were telling me there's no room for that and asking me what they should do about it. We produce that kind of Christianity all of the time. Rules-based Christianity. I know best. Anybody who disagrees with me on any subject must be wrong, even though I'm likely to change my mind sometime over the next 6 months. It's a strange world, isn't it, Jonty?
Completely.
So, Steve,
I sometimes say to people who are very dogmatic, the other week this happened, just before Greenbelt, actually, I was talking to a couple who were so dogmatic about what they said. We don't have an interpretation of the Bible. We just teach the Bible neat.
That's like Bible believing church. You're gonna have a tough time.
Yeah. And I say to them jokingly, I said, do you know, isn't it a miracle? Isn't it a miracle of all the expressions of church over the last 2,000 years, in so many languages, so many times, and so many cultures? It so happens that your particular church is the only one ever that has come out pure. Got it all right. I said, that is kind of staggering, isn't it? You must be excited.
It's like saying I don't have an accent. People with an accent, yeah.
Well, I don't have an accent. That's important.
I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're saying. No.
Steve, one thing I heard time and again. So back when I think it was your comments were more public about affirming equal marriage. And one thing I would hear a lot from kind of more conservative church leaders was, we love Steve, we think he's great, he's done loads of brilliant charity work, love his heart, but he's wrong on this. And what I and others thought was, isn't that the same thread? Isn't his heart, like, for me, it seems intuitive to then be that inclusive and that open. Is that right for you, or was that a battle and a struggle? Was that something that you had to change on?
I think that I've become far more inclusive, far more open as I've got older, because you become more aware of yourself, don't you? I'm a screwed up person, just like us all. I'm incapable of walking in a straight line. I'm surrounded by all sorts of desires and temptations and worries and fears and doubts, etc. And so I think the more you head through life yourself, the more aware you become that others are just like you. And so you become more open, because you understand people's pain and people's longing. In the 90s, I first got involved with television. In fact, I used to be one of the presenters of what was called GMTV every morning with Mr. Motivator. So he's still around. In fact, the last time I talked to Mr. Motivator was early this morning. I did a workout with him, but he's very well known. Lorraine Kelly, Anthea Turner, Eamon Holmes, all of those guys. We every morning we were on TV. Anyway, the point of telling you this story is that there was a floor manager. His name was Billy, and Billy sat there. I used to love Billy. It's a big job being floor manager, just keeping a whole of a live show moving. And I used to sometimes sit with Billy over breakfast, and we used to have a ham sandwich, kind of sandwich thing together afterwards. And Billy, one time, he was down, and he said, "Steve, you know me." He said, "I'm overweight, hugely obese. I'm a chain smoker, and I'm gay, and I'm struggling with my relationships." And so he's telling me about this. And then he said, "And I'm telling you because I feel that you'll listen to me." And then he brought himself up short and he looked at me and he said, "But please don't tell me that I need the church." He said, "My life is shit enough as it is without getting religion mixed up in it." And do you know something? A few years later, he died. He died of AIDS. And I never, ever got round. It's one of the great regrets of my life. I never, ever got round to telling Billy how grateful I am to him, because it was that sentence: "My life is in a mess anyway, so please don't stick religion on me. I'm struggling as it is." And I can't tell you how that woke me up. If I ever wrote a book about the moments in my life when my theology changed, when my worldview shifted, that would be one of the huge moments. Billy just telling me, "I can't bear all your religion. I'm having a tough enough time as it is." And I think in that moment, I realized, Malky, that I needed to bring God's grace and love and acceptance to people, not a version of good news that was really bad news and judgment.
And I was going to make a joke there to say, oh, so it wasn't studying hours of Romans in the original Greek. But it sounds like it's probably hand in hand. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like those two things are together. Like your work on Paul, for example, I find really interesting. And loads of people have this impression. I had this impression. Well, I was going to say loads of people have the impression that they struggle with Paul, they find him difficult. I used to love Paul back in my fundamentalist days. He was a great Bible bashing character for me. But that's changed somewhat for me. Why do you think Paul's got that rap? And is that a fair reflection of Paul's ministry and teaching?
Well, you're referring to this book that I wrote a few years ago, just before the lockdown, called The Lost Message of Paul. And I'll tell you why I wrote it. I wrote it because in one of the Oasis churches, which I led at the time, Oasis Church in Waterloo, I announced to the leadership team that I was going to preach a series of 4 sermons about Paul, because I felt that Paul was misunderstood, a misogynist, somebody who believed that leadership was male, that women had no part in any leadership at all, somebody who was opposed to almost everyone and was constantly warning that most of humanity was going to end up burning in hell forever. So I announced to the small leadership team that I was going to do this 4-week series of sermons on Paul. And someone in our church who'd done theology in Oxford, she's really smart. She was at Greenbelt with me this weekend. She said to me, "Steve, whatever you say about Paul, you will not change my mind. I hate the thought of even reading Paul's words. I despise everything he stood for. I cling to Jesus. I can't deal with Paul." Anyway, I preached this series about Paul and my understanding of Paul. And at the end of it, she said to me, that was incredible. You should write about that. And hence, it was a big project. It's probably the longest theological book that I've written, but I wrote about my understanding of what shaped Paul. I think Paul was a polymath. I think he was open. I think he was generous. I think he was engaging. I think that his idea of what a church was, we can learn so much from, but it was nothing like we imagine church. He was committed to setting up revolutionary cell groups that always contained the whole of humanity. Every revolutionary cell group had to be Jews and Gentiles. It had to represent the diversity of what the kingdom of God is about. And some of the complications, I don't want to get too into this, Malky, because bore everyone stiff. Well, just say it this way, like Jesus. People say Jesus was a nice guy. He wandered around saying, love your enemy, do good, etc., etc. Then Paul came and messed it all up. He's so dense and he's so complicated, and I just can't understand it. In actual fact, the rap that Paul got was this: Jesus spent his time with Galileans, his time with Jews, people who understood the food laws and the Sabbath and the Torah, etc., etc. And then Jesus said this: so now your job, guys, is to go everywhere to the very ends of the earth and tell them about this good news. Paul was the guy who got the job. And it's a tricky job when you're trying to make every small cell group, revolutionary cell group, churches, the church in Corinth, etc., when you're trying to ensure that every cell group really is about the diversity of humanity, Jews for whom the food laws and circumcision mean more than anything, and people who are not Jewish and have never heard of the Hebrew Bible and have never heard of circumcision, and when they're told about it, are dead sure they don't want anything to do with it. And Paul is trying to get them together to understand one another, to not judge one another. And that's why his writings get complicated to us, because he's that practitioner who helps people find unity and love and belonging for everyone 20 centuries ago. And we don't understand the context, but Paul was that inclusive revolutionary, not the excluding misogynist that he goes down as. I don't know. There you go. That shut everyone up. There's probably
I could not find my unmute button. I was so taken aback. Blown away.
Yeah, knock the unmute button out of her hands.
Wow. Yeah, and just going back to talk about Oasis, we've seen a lot of Christian organizations, particularly in the last few years, kind of just suffer with that kind of founder syndrome. And we've seen the Soul Survivors, we've seen the Zacharias Trust, coming to under serious and obviously allegations and downfall. And it can be very easy, I think, for people in the secular world to look at organizations like Oasis and kind of have raised heckles and just be a bit concerned about what it kind of ruins the reputation of a lot of Christian organizations. So how do you manage that as the kind of founder and kind of face of an organization like that?
Well, I'm, at a funny level, I'm very aware of what you say. I'm very aware that for some reason, Oasis has gained a huge prominence in our culture. I'm interviewed on mainstream media every single week of my life, radio, TV, newspapers, etc. And I am aware that who I am is under scrutiny, quite rightly, absolutely quite rightly. So I always say to my wife, Cornelia, we've been married 44 years. And we celebrated our 44th wedding anniversary at Greenbelt. And after we got married on a Saturday. On the Sunday, we went on our honeymoon in a Volkswagen camper van, and we came to Greenbelt for a day. So there we were, 44 years on back in the same place. But I always say to Cornelia, whatever you do, you can't divorce me now, because if you do, it will be such a huge scandal. There we are. You can see all the conservative evangelicals. We told you.
You see?
We told you, don't trust it. So you got to stick with me whether you like it or not. That's kind of thing. But but much more seriously than all of that, I am very grateful. At the age of 40, it was on my 40th birthday. I should tell you, I'm 68, so it was a long time ago, you know. So on my 40th birthday, Oasis had been going just over 10 years. And we had a board meeting. It coincided with my birthday. I think they probably did it purposely. And then we went out and we went out for a kind of big meal together to celebrate being 40. But at the board meeting, those trustees sat round with me. And for the first time, someone said to me, Steve, because Oasis was growing, not the size that it is now at all. But they said, Steve, what about your succession? What happens if you fall under a bus? They always say that, don't they? They always say if you fall under a bus, even if you don't live on a bus route, it's always a bus. It's never anything else. But they introduced to me the idea of my mortality, and they said, what are you about? And I said, I'm about growing a movement that brings hope, which is beyond me and has its own life. And they said, well, you better start thinking about how you do that transition. They made me feel like I was on death's door. I now realize I was only 40. I was only just fresh out the youth group, in fact. But they breathed that into me. I often joke with them about that. And over the years, what's happened, Laura, is Oasis actually isn't even one charity. There's a schools charity. There's a housing charity. There's a community development charity that also runs our churches and community centres, etc. There's a justice charity. There's an anti-trafficking charity. There are lots of local charities. I don't know, getting on for 30 charities in this country, and they're all Oasis. They all do extra things together. So we've got lots of leaders, and the whole thing is spread. So I can tell you that if I screw up, or if I snuff it tonight, which will be pretty embarrassing in the middle of this podcast, but tomorrow
we do wonders for our ratings, I imagine.
Yeah, and look, Steve, if you're going to die anytime soon, let us be the last podcast you do, because it'll really put us on the map, you know.
But yeah. Be good to record my last moments with. But the great thing is, it genuinely is a great thing. I've line managed very few people in Oasis. I am not the CEO of any of our charities. I am the founder who work with a bunch of great leaders. And what they do is, I think they'd all be slightly upset tomorrow morning. And I've said to them, when I die, hold a funeral that's a great fundraising event. It's your last chance to make money out of me. So get
solid. That is solid.
Yeah. Now, and all that, Laura, sounds maybe superficial, but I think it comes from a place of not taking yourself too seriously, knowing that you have a responsibility, and not being a cork in the bottle, not blocking things. You know, I am accountable. Well, I'll tell you, the boss of Oasis in England, Oasis works in other countries as well, but the boss of Oasis in England is a guy called Dave Parr. It's absolutely fantastic. He joined Oasis about 20 years ago as my volunteer driver for a year. He's now my boss. Yeah, he's the boss of all the CEOs. I'm not one of them. And I'll often say to Dave, was talking to him today, didn't say this today, but he knows it. Dave, if I'm in the way of Oasis growth, just tell me straight, because I need to know that. I'll step down, I'll leave. You're the boss. I'm here to encourage you. So I think that set of relationships kind of helps hold you in place. Does that make any sense?
I think it does. I think the fact is, they're calling you every week for the interviews, and you know, this is not to compare you to Stalin, but Stalin would be like, you know, if you want me to go, I'll go. Kind of thing. P.W. Botha in apartheid would do the same. I'm not trying to. What I'm just saying is that there is a gravity that comes with reputation. There is a gravity and a power that comes with reputation, with being the founder, with being the name, with fame. And I'm not sure just occasionally saying, you know what, if I'm in the way, you could go. You know, my mother-in-law will often say, you know, if you don't want me to come with you, I don't have to. I don't think she means that. I don't mean it when I say it. You probably mean it, but how can you? Are you confident that people are hearing it? Because you're famously very charming, very likable, and I've witnessed people interacting with you in a way that is more than respectful. It's loving. You are a beloved figure. And I think as a beloved figure, there's a much greater danger that you can get away with stuff.
Yes, there is. There is a much. Yeah. So you're right, Jonty. So it's to recognise that, isn't it? So another little safe. I'm not saying I'm beyond falling. I'm not saying I'm beyond any of these things at all. So, but I have never been on an Oasis board, and from the very start. We had 4 trustees, my friends back then, in the mid-'80s, who became Oasis trustees, and they said, you should be a trustee as well. And I said to them, with a wisdom then, I can't imagine how I was wise on that, because I was so stupid on other things. I said, I shouldn't be a trustee of Oasis because I should be sackable. I need to be accountable to you. You trustees must be the ultimate authority in Oasis, and I am accountable to you. And I've maintained that as we've developed boards. So the piece of our work, which is, you know, the biggest in scope and money use, etc., are our schools across this country. I am not on the board of Oasis Community Learning, our schools. I am not even an officer of Oasis Community. I started it. I was the chair. I was the CEO. I was everything, because it was just me to begin with. But I attend board meetings, but I don't have a place of authority, except that, of course, I get it. I am the founder, and so people listen to me. But I was saying to the leader of a big local authority on a call just this morning about a big housing project that we're developing, but it's our education board involved in it for various reasons. I said to him, he's one of their senior directors. I said, look, you've got to understand, our board is not in my pocket. And we're working on this scheme, and we've got to keep working hard, because our board will turn around to me and say, Steve, you know, we're not making progress, and we can't go with this. We're risking public money, and we will not do it. So I said to this guy, do not assume that you're talking to the boss of Oasis. You're not. You're talking to an ideas person, an innovator, but not the boss. So that's still not a full answer, is it, Jonty? But you've got to make yourself accountable. And you should interview our trustees. I think they challenge me a lot about a lot of things.
Once you get hit by the bus, they'll tell us everything, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you know, Oasis has really championed the professionalism of youth work. You know, you're talking about your schools that you've got, and I think there's been a real shift over the last 30 years from kind of paid youth workers in churches, particularly, kind of becoming the norm rather than the exception. But that's also coincided with one of the biggest ever exoduses of young people from our churches. There's just not as many young people as there used to be. So yeah, has that kind of experiment failed? Does that kind of move into professionalization is the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, I think there is a wonderful amateur youth workers. Amateur, of course, the French word for lover, a lover of young people and a lover of youth work. And we have many amateurs in Oasis. I mean, volunteers. We got thousands of staff, but we got hundreds, probably thousands of volunteers as well in youth work and in other areas. I'm not sure it's the professionalization of youth work that has crushed things. I think our culture has shifted in a whole number of ways. And I was reflecting on this just this morning. Actually, I think that the history of the church in our country. Cullen Brown wrote a fantastic book, perhaps a decade ago. I think he called it The Death of Christian Britain. I may be wrong about the title, but somebody should look it up. Cullen Brown. And he talks about the fact in this book, he uses an illustration that comes from someone else. He says that there are many people that Christianity, he says, shouldn't be measured by its center, but by its circumference. Who it embraces, not those who are tightly at the center, but everybody's engaged. He talks at one stage, as I remember, about the dust, the particles of dust of Christian faith and values being sprinkled everywhere. He talks again, an expression from someone else. I remember these metaphors. He says, Christian faith is like the banister on the stairway that you hold on to as you climb or descend the stairs. It just runs through the whole of life. And then he says that what's happened is that the vast majority of people, on whom the dust fell, who clung to the banister, who weren't at the center, who were nearer the circumference, what they've done is they've abandoned Christian faith, and they've abandoned it for all sorts of reasons. They've moved away from it. It's not the center of their existence anymore. Even though they weren't regular churchgoers, even though they were on the fringes, slightly involved, they've moved away from it altogether. I think in the world I grew up in our youth group, there were loads of kids, and loads of kids who were they Christians? Weren't they Christians? Would they have signed up? Wouldn't they have signed up? They were on the edge. Some have moved away. Some have moved closer. Some who abandoned faith have now come back to faith 50 years on. Some who were dead at the center of, and Bible bashing have drifted. But I think that what frightens me, worries me about the church in our country is we got so hung up on the little things like sexuality that we're no longer a banister for people. They just go, I can't be doing with that anymore. And I think that that's caused a great migration. And I think that's an issue. By the way, I should say that in terms of youth work, I think there's going to be a resurgence of youth workers. I really do. Whether churches can contain it or not is one of the things. I think I even talked at Greenbelt about this. I've been talking to members of the Labour government about this. I've been talking to the Home Office since the election. We have 20% of children in our country are persistently absent from school. That means they're missing for more than 10% of their time. 20% children, at least 150,000 of what we call ghost children. They're not there at all. The behaviour of children in schools is really difficult for schools to manage. SEN, special educational needs, children's mental health, etc., etc. Here's a fact, right? If you're a child of school age and you go to school every single day that you can, you never skip a day, you're never late, you go back for every after school club and breakfast club there is going, and you even go back in the summer holidays. Here is the fact: you are still in school for less than 20% of your time in any 1 year. Where are you for the other 80%? We need a youth service. And I know that people are working a way to bring it about. I'm working a way to bring it about. We're just going to launch a giant new project on Monday morning all around this, and that's what I'm talking to the Home Office about. The question is the church going to step up to that? And can it accept young people as they are without prescribing life to them? So I think there's an enormous opportunity community. But I do think the church is no longer the banister to which people cling.
So what is the point of Christian youth work in churches, church-based youth work? Because if it's not to bring them into the faith, which I think if it was, then it has failed. If it is to take care of these children who our society is not taking care of it, surely that should be in more democratic hands than the church. Surely that should be administered by government, who we vote for.
I think, Jonty, society is a partnership. I think there are things that the government can do, that Whitehall can do, that the town hall can do, that faith groups, churches, voluntary sector groups, grassroots movements can't do. But I think that there are things that open, inclusive churches can do, trustworthy churches can do, and mosques and temples and synagogues and community groups, etc., can do that government can never do, because we're on the ground in the communities where we work. We know young people. I think that it's not just a case of the care that's given, but it's who gives the care, who delivers the service. I think that, now let me tell you a story from last time Labour were in power. I was in a meeting and I think it was with the Home Office, but I can't remember quite. And somebody said, I'm simplifying, but they said, we got this plan. We need to rebuild community. That's been the Holy Grail, as you know, ongoingly, from Beveridge to Michael Marmot. So Michael Marmot constantly, report after report, says we have to rebuild community. So I was in this meeting, this must have been back in the early 2000s. And someone said, we have this plan. The plan is this. What we're going to do is we're going to build community centres right across the country. And then what we're going to do is we're going to employ community builders, networkers in them all. And they're going to rebuild community so we can do things with people, not to them. And they waxed in an eloquent way about how this was going to be done. And the cost was extraordinary. I can't remember what it was. And I butted in, put my hand up, and I said, you can do that, which is going to take 20 years, I think they were saying it would take to roll out, even if they had the money. Or I said, there's a church hall in every community in the country, more or less. Why don't you work with them? The answer was, they're proselytizing. We can't trust them. I said, well, you can trust some of them. Yeah, but how do we find the ones that we can trust? And how can we tell them apart from the ones that will proselytize and exclude people because of their sexuality or because of their gender or because, etc.? There's a great opportunity for the church and for other voluntary sector groups to work in partnership with government. And it's only in partnership that I think we're going to rebuild healthy communities for young people, for elderly people, for anyone.
I can see that. I think building community is a mantra. It has been a mantra for conservative governments, for conservative adjacent governments like New Labour. I think as an obfuscation for the fact that they want to reduce centralized costs, that they're quite willing to spend money on military, they're not willing to spend money on helping people. The NHS, was the crown jewel of Britain for the longest time until it started being privatized and defunded in the name of diversifying that particular portfolio because they wanted to spend less on that. Is there not a danger that this language of community and of grassroots is just a really great way to spend less on the people who need the most, which means you don't have to target your buddies with higher taxes for their corporations, higher wealth taxes, higher windfall taxes, and actually providing things by the government, which we're a democracy. We elect them. It's not like there's no contact between us, particularly when you get to things like council levels, because I hear a lot of the Anyway.
Yeah, no.
Don't you think that's a Trojan horse?
I think it can be a Trojan horse. I think you're absolutely right. It can be that. And of course, when David Cameron's government introduced the big society.
Yeah, what a joke.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember commentators I trusted, saying it was the wrong government at the wrong time with to introduce these policies, because everybody suspected that what Cameron was trying to do was offload responsibility onto the voluntary services and save cash at the centre, sell people down the line. So I totally get that. But here's the thing, going right back to where you started, talking about the NHS and the welfare state. I've just written a book, which is called A Manifesto for Hope. And it's about how we create hope for every child and young person in the country. And I started with this story, I think, in the introduction. It was December the 1st, 1942, when a 60-something-year-old, hitherto unknown, wandered up Downing Street, knocked on the door of number 10, and delivered the report that he'd been commissioned to deliver
by a Conservative government.
By the war government, led by Churchill coalition, war coalition. Knocked on the door, delivered it. It was 300 pages long, and then he wandered away. Over the next year, that report was printed and reprinted. It sold 600,000 copies that were read by ordinary people. People who said you could sit on a bus and watch people reading it in the middle of the Second World War. It was translated, I think, into 22 other languages within a year. That 60-something-year-old's name was William Beveridge, and it was what we now call the Beveridge Report, which was the map for the welfare state and the NHS. After the Second World War, in 1946, Chamberlain's government, Labour government, began putting this plan into action. In 1948, July the 5th, the NHS, which was the crowning glory of the welfare state, was born, as you know. But here's the thing that few people know. 2 years earlier, in 1946, William Beveridge wandered back up Downing Street and delivered another report. That report's been completely forgotten. The words of that report were not listened to, were not accepted by government or by the public. I can explain why if we've got time. But here's what that report said. It said this: my first report will not work. The NHS will not work. The welfare state will not work. The National Health Service you're putting into readiness will fail. And it will fail because you are refusing to listen to the key principle that I have articulated: partnership. This mustn't just be government. It has to be people with government. You know how it is, Jonty. If you hear about something happening in your community being run by the local council, you tend to be a little bit, that's probably not going to work.
I think people are, because they're propagandized by right-wing media and because those councils are underfunded.
Yeah, all of that too. But if you're engaged in it and involved in it, if you're given the opportunity to be involved, you actually develop an enthusiasm for it as you get involved. All I can tell you is that Beveridge said, unless this is a partnership, it will never work. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that any government should dump on the voluntary sector, on churches or anyone else, what it can't do. The NHS needed to be set up because what churches and others delivered was patchy. Where churches were strong, they delivered good healthcare. Where they were weak, they delivered poor healthcare. And in some places, there was no healthcare. But what we have now is patchy. I'd say that a welfare state needs two parents, and government has an essential role to play in creating principles and policy. But this needs to be locally delivered. I'd go as far as saying this. I don't know what you think of this. every government is responsible for every tax pound raised, and they need to ensure that pound is spent wisely. In other words, you get most bang for your buck. And I believe you get a lot more bang for your buck out of local people who are passionate about community, who know the streets, know the people, who will deliver more. And that's been found to be true in other democracies around the world. We are too centralized. That's our problem.
Other democracies in the world are obviously more centralized. That, it's a spectrum. I would say, use those local people. Why do they have to work for free? Hire them.
Hey, Jonty, I didn't say they had to be work for.
Then why are they the voluntary? Then why aren't they just employed by the government centrally?
Well, goodness me, you don't want the wonderful local charity that runs the local community centre and does a fantastic job suddenly employed by the government under some great centre. I'm not saying this is for free. I'm saying that this needs to be paid for in a respectful relationship, but you get more bang for your dollar, for your pound, from people who are on the ground, who know the community and serve the community. Well, that's been the experience of Oasis across the years. We did, but local authorities tell us all the time, you deliver quality with vision.
Yeah. I mean, it's one way of doing it. I think for me, I have a real concern about that Trojan horse, about the idea that why they can't be employed by local things that are still run by the government. The patchiness that you described still exists. Well, expertise is a thing that exists and should be used. Well, absolutely, local communities being connected and being spoken to and being consulted, absolutely. Well, but, sorry, go.
Yeah. Well, no, I was going to say, Jonty, we run 54 schools, so I've learned a little bit about this. Okay, 32,000, 3,000 kids in our schools. 54 schools, you can run them with an iron fist at the centre. You can dictate what happens in every curriculum and every lesson anywhere in the country from the centre. But actually, that doesn't produce a happy workforce. It doesn't produce creativity. It doesn't produce flair and spark.
Absolutely. Listening to the teachers. Yeah, great.
It's better to set core principles and standards together and grant freedom and give support. And I think that that's how society best works. I don't know. Tell me about your way of doing it.
I would just say...
I think, Jonty, the point you're also making is that I think both of these situations combined is an ideal. It's in, like, we're not talking about like having the government as it is running these things with an iron fist. You need that centralized force with the good values and the kind of the wherewithal to do it for the good of the people, to listen to the community and have those values at its heart for the betterment of all the people in order for it all to work.
Yeah, and underfunding government wings and public bodies and then going there failing, we need to hand them over to either the private sector or to local groups is just disingenuous. And it's what we see again and again and again.
Yeah, so that's not what I'm saying. So let's say I'm talking about partnership. I'm not talking about one or the other. I think that leaving this to government is an unwise way forward, and it's a very weak form of democracy. I think that handing over cartloads of money to local groups that in an uncoordinated way and leaving them to do it is also weak. I grew up in Croydon and in South London, and some years ago, I remember standing at a bus stop, and you get those huge ads in one end of the bus stop all lit up, and it was leading up to the local elections, local council elections, and the ad simply said, queue for question. All right. What takes 2 minutes but lasts 4 years? And then down the bottom it said, A, answer, your vote.
Yeah.
And I thought that is an extraordinarily weak form of democracy that we've got to, where we think that we vote for somebody to dole out budget, to clean our streets, to run our parks, to run our schools, to run everything, while we sit and watch the telly or make podcasts, if you see what I mean. So our job is to be engaged. That's strong democracy, to work in partnership. I would simply say that's what Oasis does wherever it works, around this country and other countries. It's what we work at. It's got to be both and, not either or.
I guess. Yeah, I'm super glad my local fire department and ambulance service don't require my church to help them.
Sure. Well,
we have taken a lot of your time as well, Steve, so I don't want to keep you on too long.
No, it's good to talk about. And of course, and I'm glad your church isn't running the A&E
Indeed.
department. Yeah,
because I've had their coffee.
Or the brain surgery department. But we were talking about youth work.
Yeah. I've heard you talking about this in other services, and I think your book touches on this. The Manifesto for Hope touches on, and I've heard you speak about this in a way that suggests that the dead hand of the government on these things is a terrible thing, and the idea that the NHS is failing because of the government obviously is a narrative that the right-wing press pushes a lot, and I think is incredibly unhelpful. Failing because of the government involvement.
So let me say, I work in the NHS. We work in the NHS. We spend NHS budget. I train NHS leaders. I talk to NHS leaders most weeks. Perhaps every week. I don't know. I think the NHS is filled with extraordinarily committed, wonderful, caring people. I think the system wastes money. I work with the Ministry of Justice. I work with the DFE on a daily basis. I think that these departments are filled with extraordinary people, but if you talk with them, they say the system wastes money. I find that the best results you get in terms of care of the elderly, care of the vulnerable, care of young people is when someone sits down with them, spends time with them, listens to them. We work in the emergency departments of hospitals around the country because we sit with a child who has shown up because they've tried to take their life, or they've taken an overdose, or because they've been beaten up, or because they've been stabbed. We sit with them, we listen to them, we learn their story. And because we're down in the community with them, we can follow through with them, not just sit there while they get stitched up and sent home, but we can work with them over the days and the weeks and the months beyond. And I think, Jonty, what people want in life is to be seen, to be heard, to feel safe, to feel that they matter. And I think, to use that wonderful term I think Laura used earlier, amateurs bring a new depth to some of that. They're not the whole answer, but I think they bring a real answer. And the way I read the Bible, to tell you the truth, is that's our raison d'etre.
Nice. Thank you, Steve. I don't think we have much time to go into the secure school you guys have started, which is a shame because it would have been cool to talk about that. But listeners should Google that and find out a little bit about that. And Steve, thank you so much for all you've been doing, and I hope you don't get hit by a bus. That'd be good.
It's good to know there's things in place for if you do.
But we are glad that you've made plans, which is really excellent.
Yeah.
The listeners will be at ease.
It would be ironic if that's the way they would have won. I have to tell you that I'm always very careful about crossing the road. I look both ways.
You should be. Gonna get hit by a community-run tram, and that'd be terrible.
Run by your church.
Run by my church. It would definitely run you over. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to Beer Christianity. You can find more of us at beerchristianity.co.uk. You can email us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com and find us on Insta and all the other places. Let us know what you think of the episode and send us your questions. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.